Hello, everyone, and welcome to Myth and Meaning. From the same people that brought you Get the Mic, this is your host, Owl.
New look, same great flavor. This is your host, Brok.
Same great flavor, indeed. Today, we're going to be trying to condense some of these things. That's kind of what Myth and Meaning is going to be as a series. We're going to condense our ideas to make them in a slightly more digestible form than what we've had before. So let's get to it. We're going to be talking about Dragon Ball today, unsurprisingly, and kind of why it exists, how it exists, etc.
Yeah, I think that without the context of what we've said in Get the Mic so far, we could say that what this is pointed at doing is taking the meaning from the mythology behind the imagery that you see in Dragon Ball and some of the ideas.
All right. So let's start off with why is anime?
Why is anime?
Why is anime? And the reason why anime is because of this. The culture of the Japanese was destroyed twice. Once in the 1800s and then once in the 19th century now.
I'll say in this episode, I think, Al, you're going to be taking the lead on most of these conversations because you have a lot more of a historical context for what you're talking about, whereas I'm a lot more focused on the psychological. So this is going to be a lot of your knowledge. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this. We've been looking at these slides for a few days now. You know, we've been thinking about what we wanted, or not even a few days, a couple of weeks at this point, and thinking about what we want to say in reference to these slides. And I think there's a lot that you have to say that I've intentionally not asked you about. I want to hear about this sort of organically, keeping, in the same tradition as Get the Mic. But let's, I want to keep these conversations fresh for people,
Yeah, and so this is exactly our point, or my point here, is that the dropping of the nuclear bombs destroyed the culture of Japan as they had to reorganize their entire society after that. Meaning they had to create new culture. And that new culture happened to be anime, among other things. But the samurai spirit, right, that had been developed in Japan was no longer something people could just act out and carry swords around and things. That was destroyed already. And this destroyed the imperialistic culture that they had before the end of the war.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely this representation in that you see in anime, almost as if it's the lens through which Japan sees itself. It's sort of the language of mythology because it's so recent. Animation being right on the cusp of the redevelopment of Japan's cultural status in the world, the sort of cultural consciousness. And the nature of it being so recent is why it's so tied to their animation here, whereas you can look at things like Disney movies and stuff, and you can see that too as these moments of sort of cultural identity. And so I think that's definitely I think that's really relevant. You're just kind of pointing out the fact that there's almost like a hard reset that they hit, and they're like, this is how we're going to start expressing ourselves culturally.
It's true. And it leads us into our point here that, yeah, the culture was destroyed and they had things to rely on. And we're going to see some of those in a second. But more importantly to say is that they could no longer continue in the manner of being that they had grown accustomed.
What manner of being do you mean?
Well, the manner of being of the militant imperialistic culture they had between the time of the samurai and the war. And so here, I want to draw some parallels between the island nation of Japan. It's secluded. It developed a feudal system not too dissimilar from Western Europe and less, let's say, autocratic than some of the continental dynasties that existed in Asia at the time. And so, similarly to Japan, another country that had lost its mythology due to conquering or war was England. And there's a certain author who I'm sure many of you are acquainted with who acknowledge this very fact. Many of the English mythologies rely on things like King Arthur, who's a Welsh, actually a Welsh legend, um, and other Celtic ones, but the English mythology has really been lost. So, needless to say, Tolkien set out to reestablish mythology for England.
Yeah, I mean, you can feel that there's a certain cultural aspect of what you're seeing with The Hobbit and the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, where it feels very grounded in this earth, like will of the soul of the world soul almost, right? It's very oriented towards life and positivity and adding value and finding meaning in things and sort of valuing the individual, and also the individual as he relates to the more I would say connected social dynamics of the family, right? There's a very um, positive aspect of it. You know, you look at the Shire, right, versus more modern interpretations of youth. It's like it's not the same.
Right, and it's an expansion upon that idea. But this is exactly it. And that was the purpose. And so, and to get finally to Dragon Ball, actually no, first to talk about the struggle that they had in losing their culture. The Japanese were extremely devoted to the cause during the war. I'm sure everyone knows, or every American at least probably knows, about the attack on Pearl Harbor and how zealous the Japanese were. That had to change, and it changed in a great way, because they still kept the samurai spirit that led them to that. They didn't disengage with the past culture that existed, and they pay reverence to it today even. So it's extremely poignant to say that the wisdom of the past is not lost on those who are making culture for Japan in the present. It may not be consciously articulated, but the point of it is still there.
Yeah, there's a morality to excellence, right? You could say that there is a respect for the realization of the potential of the self, as far as someone can culturally articulate that potential, right? And attaching that to an ethos is not a small thing. And it got interpreted into business, and it sort of got interpreted into the symbology and behind fiction, you know, the cultural mythos. You know, you could say that like mythology is the dreams of culture, right? And you can sort of do a dream analysis of that. I think that's what we're orienting ourselves towards, because we're seeing the dreams of a culture that oriented itself towards that level of excellence, towards this ethos of saying, always orienting yourself towards the betterment of your individual experience and also your respect to the world around you. That was rooted, I think, culturally, to the point that it manifested in things that we see in anime.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. And that's why Goku is the mascot, or was. I mean, the 2020 Olympics were canceled, obviously. But Goku was supposed to be the mascot for that. And that is not, shouldn't be lost on anyone.
No, this isn't like McDonald's brings you UFC fight number 2017, right? Like, Goku doesn't represent that same thing, that he's just culturally significant for the sake of being popular or recognizable. Like, Goku represents,
or even
something
the
different.
common misconception that Goku represents self-improvement and that's it.
Sure, you know, I think Goku represents something mythologically much more significant than that, and that it doesn't really come through to us. I think a lot of people that know the story of Dragon Ball and know what it's about don't really look at it through the same frame, and they don't get the cultural context of it.
They're definitely not definitely not examining it in the same way. But let's move on. So then we have the birth of all this anime and all this culture that comes out post And I think, is Astro Boy on here? He's got to be, right?
I feel like he should be the top left character in this.
I know,
because
me
Astro
too.
Boy is the rocketing off
Well,
of
Astro
that
Boy
idea.
and Godzilla are really the initial explorations into post-nuclear Japan. But yeah, I'm not seeing him on here. Point is, this was all made to kind of create that culture. Society needs a culture in order to have social cohesion. If you're culturally corrupt, I mean, I don't know who's watching this in the future, but you might just see the outcomes of that.
You might look at the West in the year 2021 as a sort of basis point, maybe.
Perhaps before, but anyhow, so you see from the idea of Japanese culture needing to be reimagined and redesigned, there is so much content that has come out from that. And so Toriyama specifically, when he was thinking about designing Dragon Ball, and he was already a successful manga artist, when he was thinking about doing the series, he was trying to think about what he could rely on, and he thought about Journey to the West. I think that is not an accident. I think that his goal, though unexpressed, is to recreate culture for Japan. And what stories do they have better than to rely on something like this?
Yeah, I think that there's something really respectable about what's happening with Journey to the West and then taking Dragon Ball as an interpretation of some of the philosophy behind it, but expanding upon it. There's a definite reverence to it, right? And I think there's a certain level of humility that comes into uniting the Eastern and Western ideas that's not just centric to Japan, right? Like, this is a Japanese interpretation of a Chinese interpretation of a Western interpretation of the world, right?
Right.
So
exactly.
this is a humble way of uniting East and West, right?
But
I think
it is, and
that's
it's
part of the
universal.
philosophy behind making Dragon Ball in the first place.
And that's why Dragon Ball, I think, is so successful across all cultures.
Yeah, I don't think it's, you can look at it as, I think a lot of people look at anime as it's like, oh, Japan's an island and it's got this reverberating effect on its culture, right? And so you can be like, oh, the degenerate nature of anime, it says something about how insular Japanese culture is. And I want to say that it's based on, a lot of Japanese anime trends are based on what happened with Dragon Ball, right? And it wasn't based on that. I don't think it was an insular idea, It was holistic in the sense that it wanted to unite East and West.
And I think it was pretty successful. However, I do want to say that they are not the same. And to get to the criticism commonly leveled against people who speak about Dragon Ball is that the common consensus is that Goku is monkey. That is the entire analysis. That's it. And if you try to offer any other analysis, you're mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at, we've got a picture here on the bottom right of YMS. Your movie sucks did a takedown on the idea that Kimba and the Lion King were the same story and that the Lion King really just ripped off Kimba the White Lion. And if you watch that video, you can't come out the other end believing that's true. You just can't. It's a complete takedown of it.
The facts are completely against that narrative.
Yeah, I mean, if you just pay attention, he completely disproves it in his video. I think that's respectable. I think we want to try to take the same approach here and say that no, Dragon Ball is not just originally an interpretation of Journey to the West.
Even originally,
No.
It's already an expansion from the minute it starts.
It's a response to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's to say, like, that was a good idea. Here's what I think of that idea.
Yeah. And so then we have Dragon Ball and all of its mythological glory. And I chose this picture significantly because it has the most important characters of the very first story of Dragon Ball.
Oh, this is just fantastic.
How we're recapping.
I love this image because it's like, I think these are actually the most important characters as far as the themes we're going to be talking about for the first season. I think that this image was conceived of with only the first season of Dragon Ball in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that way to me anyway.
Yes, and so Toriyama decided from there he was going to combine, like you said, Eastern ideas with the more modern ideas and the wisdom that has been gained in modernity with the wisdom and let's say the wisdom of the past. And it's actually very interesting that in the very first episode, Goku bows to the 4-star ball, and that is it's not an accident. None of this is an accident.
Yeah, it is a reverence towards your evolutionary biology history, right? It's a reverence to actual history and not just your cultural history, but your actual the history you have as a conscious being, right? This is what makes it archetypal, and that's something that's going to be a core theme throughout the rest of the series. Is we're going to be talking about the archetypal level. The archetypal level of analysis is saying that this relates to us as far as our being exists. It goes down to our evolutionary scale, right?
Our core, yeah, exactly. And so, oh yeah, this is what I was going to talk about. So, the history part of it, specifically in Dragon Ball, you can draw this parallel here. So, like we're saying, Goku bows to the 4-star ball. The show really starts with Goku being self-sufficient, right? And that self-sufficiency is kind of how Japan was at the time before. I think it's Matthew Perry came with the U.S. Navy and landed on the shores of Japan.
Much in the same way that Matthew Perry really made a mockery of what the themes of the show Friends was.
It's not Matthew Perry. What is his name? I think it's Matthew.
I think his
something.
name was Matt Perry.
Anyways, so this Commodore comes on down from the U.S. Navy and has a meeting with the Japanese, and it's a very humbling experience. The Japanese did not have any kind of ships of this caliber at the time. They were pretty much completely caught off guard. And as you can see in the show, Goku goes through a similar experience. Just to make a quick reference here.
Well, yeah, I mean, so if we're going to equate these ideas, Goku is in a state of sort of stasis, right? Where his ideal is the 4-star ball, his reverence for his, you could say, his biological archetypal history, right? And then Bulma comes in as this awakening force, wielding technology that Goku has no experience with, right? So I don't think that it's an accident, right? I think that it's layered with a sort of meaning that, some levels conscious, some levels unconscious as to what it means to the people who created it.
Yeah, and unconsciously expressing that idea of being exposed to new ideas, right? And that's kind of what Goku goes through in the entire first season. But I just wanted to draw this analogy as an introduction to say that the events and the history that leads up to Dragon Ball is important because it's displayed throughout its content. And like I said, these two pieces of fiction have seemingly become part of the cultural zeitgeist and almost part of a universal culture. If you think about Dragon Ball being translated into so many different languages, French, Spanish, Malaysian, all of that, Italian, it's because people around the world really connect with Dragon Ball, and there's archetypal reasons why. Really, it's a show about being and how one can conduct themselves in the world to become something divine.
Right, it's about finding the common divine in all people, I think. It's the archetypal divine. It's sort of something that we can all unite on being a positive.
Well, that's just Dragon Ball, because I
Yeah.
would say Dragon Ball Z goes further than that, but
Yeah,
we'll get into
definitely,
that later.
definitely. But
as
as far as what the Lord of the Rings means to people and also what Dragon Ball means to people, this is something that's universal to the experience of consciousness, I think. That's why we call it archetypal, right?
Yes. And so that leads us into our next point, which we're going to get into the archetypal significance of Goku starting off in the wilderness and self-sufficient, but revering his ancestry.
Definitely. And what he gets from it.
Yep. And so this was the first introduction to myth and meaning for Dragon Ball. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will talk about Goku.
We're going to talk about why Goku isn't just monkey.
And Goku isn't just monkey. Goku is an explanation of monkey.
Yes.